just about ready to begin this very important function. And so I want to say a very special welcome to all of us gathered here this afternoon. We're here this afternoon for a very special, very special event, one that I think the School of Education is very proud of, and rightly so. And so I want to say, firstly, a very special welcome to a number of persons who are here, specially invited persons. Firstly, I want to welcome Professor Errol Miller and his wife Sharon, who are here with us. I think Mrs. Miller is here for the first time at this biennial series of lectures. And I also want to recognize his son, Yakindale. And you know, he told me what it was, and I thought I would get it. But we want to welcome him for this afternoon. I also want to welcome especially Professor Richard Bernal, who was our last distinguished speaker at this series, and especially coming all the way from, originally from Argentina, Professor Eugenia Costa-Giomi, who is this evening's guest lecturer for the Errol Miller series. Professor Costa-Giomi is a music educator, and currently she is at Ohio State University. But she has gone all over the world in her field of education, music education, having taught in Canada and is now in the United States. So we want to welcome her especially. We want to welcome as well Professor Emeritus, Professor Patrick Bryan, historian, who is here especially because of his important work, which we are going to honor this evening, having written the history of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, who is the former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education and also former principal of the Shortwood Teachers College. We want to recognize as well Mr. Sadafa Bennett, who is Assistant Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, and he is responsible for science education. As well, I want to acknowledge the presence of our past manager for the Joint Board of Teacher Education, Dr. Marcia Stewart, who is somewhere here. Yes, she's over there. And also our current manager for the Joint Board, Dr. Joan Spencer Hernandez. I just want to say a very special welcome to you all. I know we have representatives from various educational institutions, from the colleges, from the School of Education, from Hart Trust, from the Ministry of Education, and other persons who would have known and worked with Professor Miller and are very happy to be here. I want to have us very specially welcome you to this very important event. Now, we have often heard it said that, and perhaps we have even used the phrase ourselves, that we shouldn't scatter roses when I'm gone. Perhaps you may even have had this other version of it, which comes from Proverbs 3 and verse 27, which says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do so." So this afternoon, I am particularly pleased that the School of Education has for the past 6 years sought to honor Professor Emeritus Errol Miller in this, the 4th biennial lecture series. And I deem it an honor to participate as chair of this function from several perspectives. Firstly, these lectures over the years have looked at various aspects of education and have been used to highlight topical issues, to provoke and stimulate thought in areas of national interest. This afternoon, our focus is on an area that has been overlooked in many respects. However, music is such a rich part, an important part of our culture, that I think this is one of the afternoons that we're going to be most pleased to have participated. So we are very happy to have Professor Eugenia Costa-Giumi here with us, who will share on the intellectual, social, and health benefits of music education. We also celebrate this afternoon a very important work done by Professor Patrick Bryan, and he has charted the history of the Joint Board of Education, and we will launch that book this afternoon. But perhaps I am particularly tickled this afternoon because I know Professor Miller, and we celebrate the legacy of a great Jamaican. One whom, if you look at his bio on the program, you will indeed join with me in saying that you're proud to be Jamaican. Professor Miller has been, for me, one who is most inspiring. And I don't call him a great Jamaican lightly. Recently, I traveled to the States, and I met Prof. Miller on the plane, and then we started talking. He was traveling with his wife, Sharon, and we started talking in the airport. And while I was on the plane, there was a young man who was sitting beside me, and I kind of sensed that he was an educator. So when we went to the baggage terminal to collect our bags, we were waiting for some time, and Prof. Miller and I struck up a conversation. And we started talking about his work in the School of Education. In fact, we talked about online teaching and online education. And shortly after, the young man who was sitting beside me on the plane came over, and he said, "Excuse me, I just want to say hello to my teacher." And he indicated that he had in fact completed the Master's in Education, the MEd program, online in the School of Education. And it was, for me, really like just coming together because, we had just been talking about the value of online education, and he was talking about his pioneering work in that area with Professor Hyacinth Evans. And then Professor Miller turned, and he went to, in his usual way, he saw somebody else, and he was about to make small talk. And then the young lady said, "I was waiting my turn because you were my lecturer and you spoke at my graduation at Shortwood Teachers College." Now remember, I said we were at the airport in Miami. And so I thought to myself, what a man and what a moment. Because right there, in less than 5 minutes, there were 3 persons who were connected by the work of Professor Miller. And I say, therefore, great in that sense, and I don't use the word lightly. So when we come this afternoon, I come with this sense of honor that we are in fact celebrating the work of a great educator. And I am privileged that I have been a part of his life and his formation, because when I started with the Rose program, he was the person who had engineered this. And I remember his work with us, mentoring us and leading us into places that we never thought we would have gone. So this afternoon, I want to just say welcome to you all, and to indicate that we have a very rich and full evening, so I won't say much more after this, but I just really want to acknowledge that it is really good for all of us to be here, and to thank you for coming out to participate in this lecture. Now, if you're following your programs, you will note that there is now supposed to be remarks from our dean. I haven't seen him yet, nor I have not seen his representative. So what I'm going to do instead is to move forward with the program and invite Professor, the Honorable Errol Miller, to come now and to say some remarks. Professor Miller, please make him welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rainford for those very generous and kind words of introduction. And I have to say that one of the things when you, as a teacher, I think teachers all know this, that one of the things you feel good about is when you see people who you have helped in some way or another to grow through teaching or whatever it is, and to see them rise and flourish. And Dr. Rainford is one of those. So I followed her career as she moved from the Rose Project into the university and then rise up the rank and is now the director of the School of Education. So I'm very proud of you, Marcia. I have to tell you, so is a student, a former colleague of mine, who is head of Cave Hill and also the director of Open Campus. I think I could take over the university through past students, but it's great to see that, you know. I wish to recognize Dr. Eugenia Costa-Diome for being here to deliver the lecture. I have to say that my godmother was a music teacher, but the logistics, and wanted to teach me music, but the logistics of it could never be organized. So I cannot recognize the first note in music. I take consolation, however, that I have a son who is music. You know, we used to sing his creations at home because we thought they were popular songs, because he played them so often and so on that we sang them. So through a child, I've had the joy of music in the house, although I myself am not capable. I have to tell you as well that JVC used to have a program called JVC FM. FM used to be more music, less talk. And I was a firm listener, because when you have gone through a week with a lot of foolishness, you just need less talk. And to tell you the truth, Professor, right now it saves me from the 24-hour coverage of Trump. So I invariably look for some station, audio or visual, that has music. So I'm looking forward to hear you speak of the benefits of music to you, and we really are delighted to have you. My colleagues in the School of Education, I see that Dr. Hernandez is now the chairman of the joint board. Should I say she's another one with the Caribbean Center of Excellence, and so on. Now, I'm particularly pleased this evening that for the first time, I shouldn't say at last, my wife has been able to come. Because on the other 3 occasions, we usually take our annual 2-week vacation in August. And the lectures have been in the second Thursday of September. Having just returned from work, she has never been able to also go back on leave to come. So this is the first opportunity, because it is in October, that she has been able to come. And I am particularly happy that she is here to share this occasion with me. And I also say that being an independent financial lady, she paid her own way. So I'm delighted that she's here. I have also to say that Professor Brian has written the history of the joint board, and during the course of of that writing, he interviewed me. And I had joined the university at age 26 and lived through some of the early things when people were doing things I didn't really understand. They called me the little young lecturer. No, I was young, but I was never little. And that really told you how low down the totem pole of importance I was. And I had no problem with that. But I saw things happening. Then Professor Brian is writing this, and he's telling me about documents that now explains my experience. So I have an idea now of the difference between a historian writing from having looked at documents and with the benefit of hindsight sees, and then those of us who have gone through the history and are now understanding belatedly why this and this was this way and that way and how things are. I have to say that to my daughter who is a youngster, our daughter who is a youngster, I am sort of history. Because when we are talking some things, she takes that to be ancient history and it's part of my lived experience. And it's another way of understanding how these things go. So I'm delighted to be here. I get the experience every time I come that I'm having the experience of being eulogized when I'm alive. I hope that the school would take pleasure, even when I'm gone, to continue. But I really appreciate that these expressions. It's a blessing. It's really a blessing to hear the appreciation. And I didn't even remember the incident, but it turned out that the reason why that young man came is teaching online, you don't get to see the students. You teach, and my thing about online is not the content. You take care of the students and keep them engaged and so on. And so I was actually meeting him face to face, but he had a good experience in the distant connections of technology. And then the Shortwood student, as I could know the teacher, she was a special batch because Mrs. Foster Allen having been there. I spoke at the Shortwood graduation in 2000. In 2001, they asked me to speak again. I said to them, you don't remember that I spoke last year? They say, yes. But this batch says they don't want anybody else to address them for their graduation but you. And she was part of that batch. And what I remember about it is that I thought, what an honor these young people are according me to want me to do this. And I thought the only thing I could do is to tell them what I've learned from life. And I penned something that has actually been published, Living in Life's Intersections, in which we are searching for number of things. I won't go through it. But that is what it meant to me, meeting somebody who you have taught and not seen, meeting somebody who was part of a group that wanted you, having, again, one of my colleagues who, young and promising, and you could see it, and you could see how those could go. And they're all coming together in one place. It was just another of those blessings. So thank you very much all for coming. I look forward to the lecture. I look forward to reading the book. I see all the distinguished persons here and recognize them, and Professor Bernal and Tor Chan, they were discussing grades before when she did economics. And for every one of you, I could go through. I recognize my sister and her brother-in-law, my brother. So I just thank all of you, and may it be a very enjoyable occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Miller. Now, Professor Miller had indicated that this is the first time that his wife, Sharon, is able to join him in this function. And we thought that it was indeed important to recognize that there is a connection, and that connection is important, of support and togetherness. And so we wanted to honor her by making a presentation to her. You have heard that she's in banking, and so I'm going to ask Dr. Hernandez to come now and to make a presentation to Mrs. Sharon Miller, who has supported Professor Miller over these years and have helped to make him who he is, and to be there to support him. Thank you, Joan. So Joan, don't sit down too quickly, because I'm now going to call on Dr. Hernandez to lead this section of the program, which is to launch the book done by Professor Brian.
Professor Miller, other members of the head table, colleagues and friends, this is a section where we're going to launch this book that will celebrate the history of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. I'm asking for my presentation from my colleagues there. Okay, while they prepare my little PowerPoint presentation, let me share with you the JBTE, affectionately called, in its current format, began in 1965 and is the premier institution offering quality assurance for our teachers in training in Jamaica, Belize, Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. Thousands of teachers have been certified, including myself, from 19 how long? And I told a group of teachers yesterday who I had the privilege of training in Montego Bay, their pathway coaches, that my certificate in teaching is the qualification that I value the most. And that was signed by the Joint Board. To honor this noble institution, I would like to use my 5 minutes, to share with you the visionaries who have since 1965, just 3 years after independence, charted the course of the JBTE. Okay, I sat and I took pictures of these persons and created this PowerPoint because I didn't want to use my 5 minutes talking. I just wanted to share the beauty of those visionaries who really sat down all these years and worked so hard to make the Joint Board what it is today. Hugh Springer, Director of the Institute of Education and first chairman. Now we get an ad. Okay, he was the first chairman of the JBTE from 1965 to 1966. Next. Who can guess who this is? Reginald Murray, chairman from 1967 to 1973. Everybody knows this one. He is Dudley Grant, D.R.B. Grant, chairman from 1973 to 1977. Very famous Jamaican. And our first female, Dr. Gwendolyn Bedima, chairman from 1977 to 1981. And who knows? Don Wilson, chairman from 1985 to 1991, and again in 1995 to 1996. Who is this? Professor Errol Miller, chairman, 1981 to 1985, 1991 to 1995, 1996 to 2003. Well done, sir. Our second female, Joan Tucker, chairman from 2003 to 2008. Another female. Dr. Rose Davies, chairman of the JBTE from 2008 to 2016. And finally, we're at Dr. Moses Peart, chairman of the JBTE from 2016 to the present. Thanks to all. Please give them a round of applause for a job well done. Professor Miller shared earlier that I'm one of the persons that he mentored. And so I want to publicly say thank you. In 2003, you made a phone call to me. I was about to go off to the Ministry of Education as the ACU responsible for special education. Do you remember you said, I can't pay you what they're going to pay you, but I can assure you that you won't regret it, that you will grow in your profession. Sir, I thank you. I thank you. Your words have come to pass. Thank you. Now, on to my other role. Professor Patrick Bryan is Professor Emeritus in History. His research interests include the social and economic history of the British and Spanish Caribbean. Among his publications are Philanthropy and Social Welfare in Jamaica, 1990, The Jamaican People, Race, Class, and Social Control, 2000. Sir, this one needs to be updated. Inside and Out and Outside In, Inside Out and Outside In, Factors in the Creation of Contemporary Jamaica in 2000, and Aviation, The Jamaican Story in 2003. He co-edited Garvey, His Work and Impact in 1991 with Rupert Lewis, and Not for Wages Alone, Eyewitness Accounts of the Labor Rebellion in Jamaica. That was done in 2003 with Carl Watson. He translated into English from the original Spanish Francisco Morales Padron. Aha, I did Spanish in high school, you know. My Spanish teacher won't hear me now. Jamaica Española, Spanish Jamaica. Among his awards are 2 Fulbright fellowships. He has also served as head of the History Department and Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at MONA, and as Chief Examiner in Caribbean History, CXC, CSEC. He served on the board of directors of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust and on the Council of the Institute of Jamaica, and as chairman of the advisory board of the Museums Division of the Institute of Jamaica. I welcome Professor Patrick Bryan. Thank you.
Madam Chairperson, Professor Miller, our lovely Argentine guest, who I plan to ask if the tango is African. I was getting a little bit nervous because I didn't see the book. And I thought that no matter how excited my imagination can be, it's very hard to imagine a book that doesn't exist. The original concept of the Joint Board of Education, of Teacher Education, which was established in 1972, rests in the formation of the Board of Teacher Training 16 years before, in 1956. What I attempted to do in this book was to note important changes and continuities in the evolution of the Board of Teacher Training, the Institute Board of Teacher Education, and then the Joint Board of Teacher Education of 1972. Organizations evolve often in rhythm with the input of both internal and external factors. The objectives, for example, of the original Board of Teacher Training have essentially remained unchanged. The regulation of the curricula and the examination of graduate teachers of the, at the time, 5 teachers' colleges, nor did the subordinate objective to balance the discretion of the independent-minded principals of the colleges, who in any case enjoyed significant autonomy while regulating them. The BTT's activities were linked to the newly centralized Ministry of Education in Jamaican hands, who, obeying the populist principles of the time, had launched a program for the rapid provision of more spaces and therefore more teachers in the classroom. The third partner was the Department or Faculty of Education of the University College of the West Indies at the time, the only campus in the British Caribbean at that time. Thus, a feature of the original BTT was its partnership with the teachers' colleges, with the Ministry of Education, with the University College of the West Indies through its Faculty of Education. The partnership was inherited by the Institute Board of Education when the institute was established within the Faculty of Education in 1963, and its functions transferred to the Institute Board of Teacher Education in 1965. With the IBTE, the Institute Board of Teacher Education, there was a nuanced shift from teacher training to teacher education, which placed greater emphasis on the comprehension by teachers of the sociological background of students. The inspiration behind the Institute Board of Teacher Education was actually the McNair report in Great Britain, which placed more emphasis on the role of universities in public education. Under the IBTE program, teachers in training were to be required to have a greater understanding of the sociological background of the children they taught. The partnership of the Board for Teacher Training with the Ministry of Education, the colleges and the Faculty of Education continued with the Institute Board of Teacher Education, but there's a qualitative difference. The Ministry of Education of Jamaica devolved most of its operational activities on the university personnel who were expected to play a more central role as advisors and researchers. The IBT, of course, had several challenges. Seeking to cope with preparing teachers, for example, for junior secondary schools, while trying desperately to keep up with the continued expansion of the primary school system. The Joint Board of Teacher Education was established in 1972 after a period of self-assessment, especially at a conference called New Horizons, where everything was examined about the relative success of the IBTE, what the failures were, what the restrictions were. Either way, since the JBTE and its predecessors have been long responsible for the regulation of syllabuses and the examination of teachers' colleges, now grouped as the TCJ, for teacher education in primary, secondary, early childhood, and special education, it follows that the organization's work covers a large sector of the education system, and this responsibility rested on the shoulders of the JBTE and its successors. I have explained this evolution partly to illustrate that in doing this project, I was fortunate in several respects. I didn't have to go overseas, for one. I had access to the minutes of the Board for Teacher Training from 1956 to 1965, and from 1972 to 2014. When I fretted about the gap between 1965 and 72, which is the period of the IBTE, I found to my delight that those records were housed in the UWI archives, so that in effect, I had available almost the entire record of the operations of the BTT, IBTE, and JBTE. I was also fortunate to have available the large body of material produced by the Faculty of Education through the years, beginning with the Center for Education attached to the original BTT. And here I must highlight the various research papers which I use extensively, the work published by Professor Miller, who has made such a significant contribution to the JBTE and to teacher education in Jamaica and the Caribbean. My good fortune also was that I was able to interview past chairmen of the JBTE, including Professor Miller, with whom I had 3 interviews, and who provided pertinent comments on the draft of the manuscript. I don't know where he gets the energy from. I also interviewed Dr. Rose Davis, whose work on early childhood education is well known, Professor Halden Morris, and very important to the completion of this manuscript was Dr. Marcia Stewart, former executive director of the JBTE and the JBTE Foundation, whose extended relationship with the JBTE provided important insights, and I might add corrections, as she perused the manuscript. In a private conversation with Errol Miller, he said, Dr. Stewart is a gem. Since historians have tended to avoid contemporary history, it is not often that they have the opportunity to interview the organizational leadership, which serves to provide insights that the written record does not always convey. Apart from the fact then that this history is an essay into contemporary history, and in part oral history, I had the opportunity to examine how the JBTE coped with the complexities of a very fluid educational system. The perspective of this history does not include a systematic study of the evolution of the Jamaican educational system. That would be a multi-volume study. But tries to show how the JBTE and its predecessors, along with the colleges, rode the rough tides of simultaneous expansion and consolidation. The challenges were both national and international. The JBTE had to oversee the conversion from chalk and blackboard to black computers, distance education, blended learning, and general international connectivity. They had to cope with the radical changes in syllabuses and methodology introduced by the Caribbean Examinations Council, which conducted its first exams in 1979. The obvious challenge for the JBTE educational system is that the new modes of interaction are demanded before the old modes can be fully digested. The evolution of the JBTE parallels and overlaps the evolution of Jamaican and Caribbean societies, which simultaneously favor integration but desire separation. Yet there has been significant cooperation between the JBTE and other areas of the British Caribbean, particularly in the realm of the exchange of ideas. The JBTE, responsible for the Western Caribbean, has shown the ability to work effectively with the Bahamas and Belize, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the Cayman Islands, despite institutional differences. While teacher-educator numbers have graduated from a few dozen in 1956 to well over 600, and in Michael's case, over 1,000 by 1985, and now provides adequate spaces for elementary and secondary schools for all classes and all colors, much has happened in Jamaican society itself between 1956 and 2014. Rapid urbanization, economic decline of sections of the countryside, cultural nationalism, black power, a culture of violence, risks to the health of youth, austerity imposed by International Monetary Fund, have ensured that from the perspective of 2014, 1956 is a foreign country. In other words, if education is intended to be a preparation for life, we must remember that the conditions of life vary in time and space. Schools contribute to cultural development, but they are only part of the determinants of culture, which derive from early childhood experiences, exposure to the media, and other things. Parenting. These factors help to explain how critically important it was for the JBTE, with considerable support from governments, to launch the early childhood education program, the health and family life education program, and environmental studies. By 2014, the regrouping of the teachers' colleges under the TCJ, which enables the colleges to grant degrees in association with the UII, initiated a major change in the functions of the JBTE, which had enjoyed the power to grant diplomas, but not degrees. But there was still continuity in that the JBTE became responsible for the quality control of the TCJ's academic offerings. In many respects, the relative autonomy enjoyed by the TCJ was not an unexpected development. It was in part the result of a belief, first voiced by Dr. Elsa Walters, the second chairman of the BTT, who had in the early years envisaged full autonomy for the teachers' colleges. Another major change, of course, was the establishment of the JBTE Foundation, essentially the financial arm of the JBTE, a very important part of the JBTE's evolution. The JBTE acts as an educational consultancy. So the JBTE then has had a continuous role in, in Jamaican education, in spite of what might seem to be breaks in that continuity. But that continuity and change, I think, is well summarized by Dr. Walters, Elsa Walters. And here I quote her. The study of education does not proceed in logical sequence, by learning one aspect and leaving it to go on to the next, as when you learn arithmetic and master addition before you learn multiplication. In studying education, we continually return to the same topics, widening and extending our knowledge about them, adding new knowledge, and often modifying what we have already learned. Let me end by thanking all those without whose cooperation this history would not have been possible. I've already mentioned Dr. Stewart and Professor Miller. I also want to thank Mrs. Foster Allen for a foreword to the book, which made me want to read the book. And of course, for Mrs. Cecile Hemmings for her painstaking editorial work. But also very important was the availability of materials from the National Library of Jamaica and the West Indian collection of the UII. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. We'll now have Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, our former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education and former principal of the Shortwood Teachers College, to join us. Thank you. She's going to do her own reflections, having read the book.
To Prof. Miller and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and all my colleagues and friends in the audience, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to read the book. Let me tell you how it started. It started out with an apologetic call from Marcia, who said what she was asking me to do would probably upset my Christmas holidays. She clearly had forgotten that for us retirees, every day is a Christmas break. So when the email arrived, I thought this was a great task, to read and then try to write something sensible about a text that was crafted by one of our foremost historians. So amid stops and starts, I realized that the task had become a real pleasure, Prof, and a learning experience for me. Thank you very much, sir. So what did I think as I read? I thought, wow, here is Prof charting the circuitous and evolutionary history of teacher education, the role of the joint board in its different iterations, and specifically in Jamaica over the past 60 years. And he did so with such dexterity and clarity that held my attention, and I hope will hold yours too. It helped to fill the gaps that were demonstrably there for me. I don't know about you, but I'm telling you, I had some gaps in my own mind. Prof. Miller, he corrected some misunderstandings, and he brought to light many threads that have been the warp and weft underpinning the discourse on teacher education over these many years. So the work asks us to think about how the sector responded to policy direction and directives that emanated from ministers of education. It then throws valuable insights into how the teacher education sector, led by the board, responded. The board, from Edwin Allen with his New Deal for Education, the consequences of that policy, to Mavis Gilmore. There's a lady who said, you know, I want to be like Mavis Gilmore, married 4 times. Anyway, who championed a slate of reforms from the education regulations to the structural work of the Joint Board of Teacher Education and the use of technology. You know, Mavis sort of talked about how we should be using technology in teacher education, to Howard Cook and Eric Bell, who oversaw Michael Manley's massive expansion and transformation of the education system with its attendant teacher education requirements. Prof. Brian brings into focus both Caribbean thought and political ideology, and the many ways in which thought leaders sought to direct, used their position as premises, and they challenged the work of the board. He also helped me to realize that the prevailing thoughts at the time on education and Caribbean identity, unity and cultural integration, as espoused by Phyllis Doyle, Hugh Springer at UCII, helped to shape the organization, its structure and its reach, while the thoughts of people like William Demas formed and shaped the Caribbean Examination Council. Issues, for example, of autonomy versus that of centralization of the colleges that appeared to be new to some of us in teacher education in the 2000s actually had its roots way back with Elsa Walters in the 1970s actually saying, boy, you know, maybe you should be autonomous, and others saying maybe you should be. Am I getting the thing right, Prof? You can always correct me. Then I used to go to board meetings, and all of my colleagues and I was new, would sit there, and Prof. Miller would just have his way. He would just talk, and there was this deference in the boardroom. And me being with my bright little self coming out of England, you know, I think we could just say, excuse me, so why? And my colleagues would look at me as if to say, Prof's in the chair. You know? So we went through that period where I think it was really because of the love and respect that we all showed for Prof. Miller, why there was this deference in the boardroom. So it helped me too to understand the historical tensions. Are there any teacher trainers, teacher educators in the room of old? Not the new ones, you know. Because, well, Asburn, you will remember that there were always tensions between the college lecturers and the external examiners of the Institute of Education. And you know what Prof. Brian has helped me to understand is that it wasn't new. It had been there for a very long time, over many years. So I was sort of satiated, you know, satisfied that it wasn't a revolutionary thing that was happening in the late 2000s. So another thing that is exciting for me is that although Professor Miller occupied the chairmanship of the Joint Board of Teacher Education, and really his voice towers, and he's very influential. You know, for 36% of the 42 years of the JBTE's existence. Did I get that right? Anyway, it's a long time. You were there for a very long time. And Professor Miller was absolutely influential, just directing us and charting new pathways in terms of thoughts and so on and so forth. But equally influential in their time was a lady called Gwendolyn Gadima, and one of the 4 women who served as the chair of the board. You know, for a very long time, because I wasn't educated in teacher education here in Jamaica, and I sort of picked up the pieces very quickly. Prof Miller, do you remember me coming when I had just come back from England to talk to you, sir, about education? Well, I had been going along for years with this thing that is only DRB Grant did knew anything about early childhood education, only to find out in the book that it was not so. Not at all. So while we laud DRB Grant, we found that there were others way back who were also championing the cause. So thank you for disabusing me of that idea. So I was heartened to see also the contributions of principals, Marjorie Myers, Shortwood, Renford Shirley, and Glenday Michael. And right at the end, Cecile Walden, for the work that she did with the TCJ, or the precursor site, moving into the TCJ. So the board is clearly a living thing that has changed over many generations, and Professor Bryan has captured well its pragmatism, its responsiveness and flexibility in the evolution of teacher education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Foster Allen, for sharing. I'm sure that you have sort of piqued our interest and inspired us to certainly get a copy of the book and look at it. And we are truly grateful for this work at this time. Now, we would like to make 3 presentations now to 3 institutions. Let's get this right now. So, firstly, we're going to ask Mr. Sadfer Bennett, representing the Ministry of Education, to receive a copy of this book. I'm asking Professor Bryan if you would come to make this. Sadfer? I believe that there's going to be a photo moment, so maybe you should go around there and do something that makes it look as if you, yes? You should show the book. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Thank you. No, stay there, Prof. There's another one. And is Miss Rosemary Runcie here? Miss Runcie here? Yes, she's here. She's representing the main library, UWI Mona. Excellent. Thank you. One more. And Dr. George Dawkins is representing the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. Thank you, Prof. The rest of us, you have to buy the book. All right? Very good. All right, moving right along. At this time, we're celebrating music and music education this afternoon. I see some persons from the Edna Manley College for the Visual, and I see a past director, Mrs. Lumsden Ashley, who is here, and other persons from the Edna Manley College. Welcome. And I know that there are other colleges represented here. I saw St. Joseph's, I see Michael, I see Shortwood, and there may be others. I see Bethlehem. Yes. and I am very happy to see all my colleagues from these various institutions. But at this time, we're going to be entertained by the St. Catherine High School Band. And I am there. Make them welcome, please. A group of young men, it's wonderful to see them. And they're going to entertain us for a little while. Thank you, St. Catherine High. I am not a musician, but I happen to know that that took a lot of work. And so we really want to commend them and commend their teachers and to really acknowledge the fact that, music in our schools is, really almost non-existent in some schools. So for them to have a band, it's something to celebrate. So we want to encourage them that they will really continue to go from strength to strength. So at this time, we're getting ready to have our guest speaker do her presentation, her guest lecture. And I'm going to call now on Dr. O'Neill Mundell, who is lecturer in the School of Education and he's himself a music educator, to introduce her.
Professor Miller, distinguished persons at the platform, colleagues, all good evening. In 2003, while I was a beginning graduate student in music education, and I was doing a lot of reading of the journals, one name I came upon pretty often in the journals was Eugenia Costa-Giome. Of course, when I decided to pursue doctoral studies, the choice was clear. One of the first places I had on my list of places to apply to was University of Texas at Austin, for the sole reason to study with Professor Costa-Giome. So we did meet eventually in 2004. She, a consummate professional and prolific researcher, her groundbreaking research has been informative and relevant well beyond the field of music education. She has been the leading researcher in music perception, the non-music benefits of music involvement, and music development of children, infants in particular. She has also served on numerous editorial boards, as your program will show you, that deal with music education, music perception, music psychology, and so on and so forth. She's a perfectionist, a brilliant and thorough academic who is nonetheless always approachable and accessible. She has been mentor to many music education researchers, and her interest usually goes well beyond the time that they would have graduated, and I am one such person. Prof is extremely humble. She really hates the limelight. So one of her most nervous and uncomfortable moments happened 2 years ago, when she was forced to appear in the middle of a football stadium with about 100,000 adoring supporters, and these were supporters of the Ohio State University. Football team, yes. And of course, they turned the spotlight on her. What was the occasion? She was being awarded the coveted Distinguished Teaching Award from the Ohio State University in 2017. Professor is a mother of 4 children. They're adults now, but she reports that she constantly worries about them nonetheless. She once described herself in a class as having many children so that she could do lots of research on them. Professor is an advocate for musical engagement, and she actually practices what she preaches. So as she put it, her children had a choice as it related to music, but it was not a choice of whether or not they could take music. All 4 of them had to do music. The choice was just simply what instrument they would play or learn. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no one more qualified to speak to you on intellectual, social, and health benefits of music education than its professor. It is indeed my pleasure to give you Professor Eugenia Costa-Giume, our keynote presenter.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. A pleasure because this is such a beautiful campus, this is such a beautiful country. My first visit to Jamaica. And it's an honor because to speak to such an educated audience with such expertise and to be invited to such a prestigious lecture series is truly an honor, so it's humbling. Thank you for everybody who made this visit possible. I'm enjoying it, and I'm not sure why you brought me here because you already heard everything that you really needed to hear, that music is more important than words, and here you are, you're going to listen to me at least for an hour. Then we heard that actually Professor Miller doesn't have musical ability, so the only thing I can say that he's really wrong in that, one of the few things that perhaps he's wrong about, because we all have musical abilities. And as a music educator, I truly believe that one of the roles that we have is to develop those abilities to whatever potential the person wants. So that is what advocacy I do, to truly make music education reach everybody, because everybody has the right to have a rich musical culture. But here I am preaching to the church, right? I mean, you know that, because since I arrived here just a few days ago, that is everything I have heard, music. So I have the pleasure of attending a service on Sunday. My services last 45 minutes, 50, and here we were 3 hours and it's still going, right? Because music is more important than words, right? So you pray twice by actually singing. So I truly don't know why you brought me here, but I will try to show that what you are doing every day, apparently, not just on Sundays, but every day, by having music in your life, is actually supported by empirical research. So I'm going to show you just a few pieces of information of my own research and the research of many others that shows that music is powerful. It's not just pleasurable, but it's powerful in many ways. It has social, cognitive, and health benefits, and we are very interested in actually exploring those. So we have been doing that for centuries, for millennia, actually. But I'm going to show you some pieces of information about this interest in uncovering the benefits of music, something that we enjoy so much. And this has it has benefits at the individual level and at the social level. So let me show you just a few articles that started appearing in the early 90s. So in the early 90s, brain studies caught people's attention. We became fascinated with brain studies. And probably it's because imagery, the ability to actually show what was happening in the brain became more accessible. The technology became cheaper. The MRI machines, for example, I was at McGill University at just one block from the Montreal Neurological Institute, that is arguably one of the centers of brain research in the world. And the machines were able to be used for clinical purposes, and not just for clinical purposes, but for research purposes. So instead of the studies in research being conducted at 3 in the morning when no machines needed to be used for the hospitals, and that is when researchers had access to the machine, there were dedicated MRI machines for research. So that is where these things started appearing. Like songs affect the brain and emotions, Mozart helps the brains develop, music can make your brain grow bigger, and we know that bigger is always better somehow. Music is the food of the brain, a neurologist finds. And these were things that were associated with the fact that classically trained musicians show a neurological configuration that is different from people who don't study music. Whether things were good or bad, we didn't really quite know. But for example, one little example, the planum temporale, that is in the back of your brain, there's an asymmetry that happens in classically trained musicians that is not found in non-classically trained musicians, in non-musicians actually. And that was considered something that was the result of all those years of training, of practice making perfect, right? As we heard from our young musicians here. The thing is that when we think about the brain as something that is being developed, it shouldn't be so surprising. We would not be surprised when someone starts doing weight training or lifting or playing tennis intensively, and the muscles will develop in a different way, right? All of a sudden, one arm would be stronger than the other one. We are not surprised by that, but somehow we are surprised by this extraordinary organ that is the brain that is immersed in something as intensive as is music practice, something that we do hours every day. Why wouldn't it change, right? So that is where the fascination with neurological research happened. And we started having some unusual studies being done. And it became so popular, this topic of actually the power of music and the benefits of music instruction, that we even had jokes. So this was really in the popular domain. These were not just a few researchers doing a few weird studies. Everybody knew about this Mozart effect that caught everybody's attention in the early 90s. And you don't need to read all the words, it's just to show you how present it was in the popular media. Music does not produce death. I would just want to clarify that. It can clear a room of teenagers, and that is just to show you the power of music. So this happened in Canada, in a metro station underground. Canada has snow and ice for a good 6 months, if not more, so there are all these tunnels underneath, and the metro system is very important. There was this very important commuter station, and teenagers coming out of a high school would like to hang in there, just talking and doing their things, but making the life of all the commuters that needed to go and change lines, etc., miserable. So typical Canadians, non-confrontational Canadians, what they did, rather than kicking out the teenagers from there to the cold above, they would just play arias by Verdi, and that cleared the room of all those teenagers who looked for other places. So this is just to show you how music can be used not just for intellectual development, but for other purposes as well. Now, if you are curious about the issue of luring men to death, that is referring to the Greeks, in which we have heard about those sirens that play this incredibly beautiful music, that it's indeed so beautiful that we lure sailors in their ships to this very rocky shore where they will find their death because they couldn't find their way out. And I will keep going because I already made you laugh. So what I want to point out that there was this phenomenon that happened, that developed in the early 90s, that was called the Mozart effect. And there are so many misconceptions about what this was. So I want to show you what this actually is. And actually going to test you almost on it. So this was a study that was done with undergrad students. And it consisted of a task that is called the paper fold task. And this is what it was. So if you have ever done origami and you follow instructions of your teacher in front of the room or the little book that you have, so you fold and you fold and you fold and you open, and it's a total disaster. When I do it, someone else has this beautiful bird coming out of it. So this is something similar. So you fold, you fold, you fold, you fold, and then you cut those three little things. When you open the paper, how does it look like? And I will give you 30 seconds to think about it. All right, how many people say that is A? Raise your hand. Don't be chickens, you have to choose one. A? Nobody? B? Only two. C? There are almost 80 people in the room, so I do need to see 80 hands going up eventually. C C. I see only one hand for C, two hands, D. You better have 60 people here. For D, there are a few, so I guess that everybody thinks that is E. Okay, those 3 people who raised your hands for B, you got it right. Now, the question is, how did we do that, right? So the argument that the researcher behind this study, Francis Rauscher, was that you have to keep in mind the space and the time at the same time. So you have to follow this thing as it happens in time and have this vision of how it is in space. And in her view, that is what music does. When we listen to music, we are listening to something that is gone. The sound, once it's played, is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It only exists in our brains, right? When you write a book, you have your pages in front of you. You have the book in front of you all the time. You can modify things. You can look at it, right? In the same with paintings. But with music, the second a sound is played, is gone. So it's taxing our memory in ways that perhaps other things don't. We have to remember. If you remember, you recognize a melody, it's because you were able to remember that melody from the time that was played before. And you have to hold it in your mind. And then perhaps perceive that it comes back played by a different instrument, or slower, or in a different tonality. And you have to see all these transformations in order for you to recognize that that's the theme, right? So listening to music and understanding music is indeed a very complex process. The nice thing is that it's pleasurable at the same time. Isn't it great? We wish math would be that way, right? So it's complex and it's pleasurable. So that is the beauty of music. Now, this study, as interesting as it was, argued that people who do better in this test are more intelligent, and that didn't sit very well with researchers at the time. In this study, the treatment consisted of 10 minutes of listening to Mozart, relaxation music, or silence. This was done with undergrad students, and the students had to sit. Well, that was about 4 seconds that I stopped. Now, you do that for 10 minutes, and then I give you a test. You would be sound asleep, right? So listening to Mozart or listening to relaxation music were the other 2 alternatives. And what the researchers found that indeed there was an improvement in how students score in this test before and after those 10 minutes of Mozart. Not so for silence and for relaxation music. So the conclusion was that Mozart makes you smarter in this paper unfolding task. The equation that task is an indication of how smart you are, which is a little problematic, right? Well, not only that, is that you're smarter, but just for 15 minutes, then you go back to your stupid stuff again. So as the music educator, I would say, well, perhaps this is good, because then we have to listen to Mozart all the time, right? That will give a job to all these young musicians trying to make a living. Additional, there was a lot of research that followed that seemed to contradict and not able to corroborate those findings. Just to show you that this was not a crazy North American thing, this happened in other countries as well. Everybody was fascinated with this idea that something as simple as listening to music for 10 minutes can actually make you smarter. I mean, it would be wonderful, right? 10 minutes, and there you are. I mean, it would solve all the problems, right? So, of course, when things can be too good to be true, right? Perhaps that's part of the problem. But there were studies that show actually some other interesting findings, and is that, yeah, people do perform better in certain spatial tests of, the use of space, but with other music. Schubert, Yanni, I don't know if you're old enough to know who Yanni is, listening to a story by Stephen King, a very popular writer in the US, or even looking at the screensaver. And again, I don't know if you're old enough to remember those little fish that go through the screen and etc. So if you are basically intellectually engaged on something, that will prime you to do better in the test. If you're bored to tears and fall asleep, probably you're not going to do very well in the test. So this theory didn't stand the test of other research. However, the interest in the benefits, the intellectual benefits of music, listening to music, or even learning music continue. And this is a study that appeared in the front page of USA Today, which was a remarkable thing, because when have you seen anything related to music on the front page of a national newspaper in the US? So that happened in 1993, and that study was a little bit more interesting. In that study, the description is about two groups of children at two different daycares between 3 and 5 years old. At one of the daycares, they received 6 months of music lessons daily. Part of the lesson consisted of singing, and part of the lesson consisted of playing in a little keyboard that the children had. And what the researchers found, that after administering a whole battery of tests, the Wechsler intelligence scales, before the 6 months of treatment or after the 6 months of treatment, that there was a significant difference for the children who took the lessons on only one of the subtests. The Wechsler is a very long and complicated test. I see some people saying this. It takes a lot of time to administer this test, and it has many parts. For only one of the subtests, a significant difference was found. And what that test was about is almost like putting a puzzle together. The children were given a picture of, let's say, a glass or a rose, and they were given 4 blocks, and they had just a few seconds to try to put together the rose with those blocks that they have, to move them around so they could match what they see. And so it was a matter of accuracy and speed. Okay. On the basis of that test is that we see that headline. Music lessons may open mind to math and science, putting a puzzle together. Now, I don't know how it is in Jamaica, but taking private lessons in the US is a very expensive affair. Each lesson will be $50. Puzzles you find in a garage sales for 50 cents. Okay, so if you want your child to put puzzles together better or faster, wouldn't it make more sense to actually train them with puzzles, right? So is it really the case that putting a puzzle together conduces to higher achievement in math or in science? So this is just to show you how quickly we become fascinated with the research finding, and little by little we transform it into something that is not. Right? So the need to be aware of the fallacies of what we do as researchers, right? Now, there's some other research that is interesting and seems to support this idea that there are cognitive benefits associated with music instruction and with music learning. The SAT test, for those of you who have done any studies in the US, refers to a test that all high school students have to take in order to be accepted into university. It's one of the ways that universities can actually grant admissions to students. So might pick, the higher percentile of SAT scorers. So this test is taken by thousands and thousands of high schoolers every year. And what this shows is the general average, and I'm showing one of the tests at the time that this research became so fascinating to everybody. This is the average of all students who take the test. And this is the average of those who actually participate in the arts, theater, literature, music, which, as you can see, is higher. That is for verbal, and this is for math for the same year. It's a very similar pattern. Let me show you in more detail something else that is interesting. interesting here, and it's a pattern that shows that the longer that students in public schools participate in the arts, the higher their scores in these tests. So for example, for students who did not take any arts coursework while in middle school and high school, because in many states, arts are electives. So you don't have to take them unless you want to. And you can take them every year if you wish, but you don't have to take them every year, okay? So there are students who didn't take any art in the 90s, for example, and this is for the verbal score, and they score about 403, okay? If they took less than 1 year of art studies, they score 415. Between 1 and 1.5, 422, et cetera, et cetera. If they took more than 4 years of art studies, mainly they took art every year they could, they're scoring 451 compared to 403. That is pretty remarkable, right? And that is consistent across the years, the same for the math scores. Furthermore, if we look at something that is very typical in certain states in the United States, that are the all-state ensembles. These are ensembles that orchestras and bands and choirs that are selected on the basis of ability and achievement, music achievement, in the students across the state. And these are the numbers that I have for Texas, that is well known for the music programs. So music education in public schools in Texas is very important, and students, when they compete for the all-state denomination, they are going to end up playing in ensembles that almost sound like professional ensembles. Okay, so these are the scores of the students who, for example, in 2008, were selected to be in choirs, or in concert bands, or in orchestras. And I'm going to show you the score for the string orchestra. The score in the SAT score was 2050. 2050 for those students who were selected to be in the string orchestra. The national average was 1511. The Texas average was 1481. So we are comparing 1481 to 2050, which is, you know, a big difference, right? Furthermore, also in Texas, the No Child Left Behind classification, and if I have time, I will talk about what No Child Left Behind is, but this is just a classification of the quality of the school, okay? And when we look at the higher academic level of the school, which schools rank higher or lower, we see a relationship to enrollment in the arts. So in the higher academic standing schools, there's a lower dropout rate, there's a higher attendance, there's higher enrollment in the arts. So this relationship between academic achievement and art participation seems to keep popping up no matter where we look for it, right? So on the basis of this, how many of you will enroll your children in music programs? Raise your hands. It's pretty interesting, right? And I must confess that I did something that I shouldn't have, and was, as I was analyzing data, similar data to this, it was not exactly this, I made my son to start taking lessons, and shortly after, all my other children. Now, as I'm very glad that Dr. Mundell mentioned that, I truly believe in music education. All my children will have been engaged in music education no matter what. But the point was that something that I found in terms of a relationship between music participation and academic achievement triggered my decision, I'm going to do it now. And I'm called the teacher that minute. While, indeed, there are other explanations for why that relationship actually exists, right? So I saw someone raising a hand, and I think that is the question, yes? Thank you for the question, because I assume that you know what music programs are in the United States, and that is obviously, why would you know? So in most schools, in most public schools, there's going to be a choir, a band, and an orchestra. There are school districts that perhaps don't have orchestra, but I can assure you, they all have bands. Football, I mean American football, is very important, and there is no American football without the band that plays and accompanies the football. So band programs, marching band, and also concert bands are very present in all American schools. Now, in some states, these programs are particularly good, and I have been extremely lucky to be working in two of the states that are at the top of the list, Texas and Ohio. Those are the two states in which music education programs in the public schools are the strongest. Right? Thank you so much for the question. There are choirs as well, right? So, yes? In all the data that I show you refers mainly to secondary schools and students participating in those programs who do read music. At the elementary level, it's optional. Not everybody actually reads music. Yeah. So how can we explain that pattern of association between academic achievement and participation in the arts, right? Well, who studies music? So this study was done with 13,000 students. This is national databases that allow to go through, these incredibly big samples. And those who choose to take music in high school is about 20%. And the group of students who actually chooses to study music is quite privileged, I would say. It's not representative of the American population. So there's 61% female, 80% come from two-parent families. That is not the norm. Strongly white. They live in suburban schools. Suburban schools in the US means richer neighborhoods, yeah? Higher income neighborhoods. So there are some enrollment inequalities that we have been trying to address in music education in terms of race, socioeconomic status, and also immigration. So whether they have to take English as a second language, that is what that ESL refers to. The issue of discrimination as referring to the opportunity to access equal services, including music, is critical in the US. We have been fighting that for centuries, right? So we are still at it. If you look at who takes private lessons, you have it even more selective, right? Because these people are actually paying for the lessons. But it's something similar. So these are educated parents, two-parent families. These children participate in extracurricular activities. Right. So who chooses to study music? Well, usually the students who choose to study music, and there's a long list of researchers here that is a little bit cut off the screen, but trust me, I mean, we have been gathering data on this for decades and show that those students who choose to study music have superior academic performance, higher socioeconomic status, higher parental education, they participate in extracurricular activities, to the point that actually in certain studies, particularly in studies that are looking at what leads into higher academic achievement, consider music not a predictor of achievement, as we would like it to be, but rather a mediator of family background and student status. It's an indicator, right, of family background and student status. So music involvement varies systematically as a function of social class. My question to you would be, is that so here? Is that present here as well? So I'm studying that in my native Argentina. I left Argentina decades ago, so I'm interested in checking whether that is the case in other countries as well, right? So what I hear is that money matters, right? So when you have to pay for it, obviously social class becomes in very strongly, right? Now the interesting thing is that we find this not just in terms of private lessons, but in the public school system where students supposedly don't pay to learn. They can register in orchestra and band and choir, right? If a student cannot buy a flute, will be given a flute by the school. It might not be the great quality, but a flute will be given to the student. So money is not the excuse, yet in the public school system, we also find that students who choose to study music actually are not like everybody else, as an average, of course, as a group, okay? The other question that we have is about who, not only who chooses to study music, but who persists in studying music, right? It's not easy. I mean, I'm sure that across this audience, there are people who started learning an instrument and just 1 or 2 years later, for one reason or the other one, they stopped. And when we become old, we said, oh, I wish I had continued, right? So I heard that story many times. And that is the story of our lives, right? So look in Texas. One of the states with the strongest music program, there are 250,000 students register in bands, okay? And when they move to high school, these are middle school students. 250,000 of students register in band in middle school, 6th to 8th grade. When they move on to 9th grade, these are all the students who drop out. They could continue, but they drop out. So 90,000 continue studying band. Now, mind you, 90,000 is a big number still. But what happened to all the other ones, right? When we look at orchestra, we see a similar pattern. When we look at choirs, we see a similar pattern. So there is this selection, natural selection, somehow that happens in terms of who chooses to study music. But there is something else that is happening of who persists in the study of music, right? So who drops out of music instruction? Well, those students with lower achievement, lower socioeconomic status. Students who drop out usually miss more lessons, do not complete the homework, practice less, and show diminished motivation. So they are less disciplined, less responsible, and have lower levels of concentrations. I'm just showing research that unfortunately is not appearing there. So what I'm pointing out is two things that might indicate that that relationship between achievement, academic achievement in math and language, and participation in the arts cannot be necessarily interpreted as the arts making students do better in a school. Perhaps there is something else, because students who choose to go into music and who can persist in music are actually the most qualified to do well in school. So it's more a process of attrition that happens over time than perhaps music actually producing these higher academic scores. So the only way of studying that, studying the cause and effect between these two factors, musical achievement and music participation, academic achievement and music participation, is actually by doing an experimental study in which you can control the intervention that is music studies, and that is what I did. So in a study that I did many years ago, I was interested in studying this premise that studying music makes children do better in school, makes them more intelligent, and contributes even to their self-esteem, okay? But if it's true that music does all those things, we would like to give that to the students that are less privileged and less capable of doing music in the first place, right? The ones who wouldn't register for lessons, who couldn't pay for the lessons, who wouldn't register in band. So I was interested in providing music lessons to those who normally wouldn't have chosen or been able to take the music lessons. So when I did my study, my interest was in studying the effects of piano instruction on cognitive abilities, academic achievement, and self-esteem, with a very carefully selected sample based on children's characteristics, and this was a randomized sample. So this is not students who said that they wanted to study music, but actually any of them. So we look at you and said, it looks like you want to study piano. And of course, as children go, they would say, yes, right, sure. And they will be part of the study. I will be happy to explain all the details of the selection, but I would like just to show you a glimpse of the results. So I collected many measures from these students. There were 120 of them coming from 16 different schools. In each school we had control and experimental children to be able to control for characteristics of the schools and the teachers. There were 9 different teachers providing the lessons, so if there were benefits, they couldn't be associated to a very specific teacher, okay? And I collected all that information from the report cards that are the grades that students receive in the schools. There were interviews with the children, parents, and teachers. There was a weekly piano progress report, and there were all the standardized tests of cognitive abilities, academic achievement, self-esteem, musical abilities, and motor proficiency. So this was a long, big study. Let me show you what we found in terms of total cognitive scores. This intervention was originally going to be just 2 years at the request of the funding agency, the National Piano Foundation, that intended to find results that would allow them to sell more pianos, right? If studying piano makes your children more intelligent, what are you going to do, right? If you can, you will buy a piano and give them lessons, right? So anyways, for the National Piano Foundation requested that the study be extended to 3 years because the results look so good after 2. And then you will see what happens. So these are the scores in the cognitive abilities test. That is basically an IQ test. And as expected, of course, we didn't see any difference between the 2 groups before everything started. We want that, the 2 groups to be comparable. After 1 year, there was a significant difference. As you can see, it's tiny. I could blow this graph immensely, so that difference will look enormous, right? So that is how we lie with statistics, right? But this is how big it is, okay? It's tiny, significant, but tiny. After 2 years, there is a significant difference as well. After 3 years, no difference, right? For the spatial abilities, something very similar. There were significant difference in favor of the lessons. My gosh, after 1 year, after 2 years, no differences after 3 years. In terms of academic achievement, no effects on math or language, standardized tests, no effects on school report cards. The only one I should say is that we did collect grades in music, right, by the music teacher. And yes, my gosh, there were differences in favor of taking lessons. So children who took the lessons got better grades in music. And the important thing is that the teachers in the schools did not know, in principle, who was in each group, right? That was critical. So they were blind to the intervention. In self-esteem, I didn't have any chance to show you research on that, but we feel good about achieving things, right? When we do, I'm sure that those high schoolers, after we clap and we enjoy their music so much, they were leaving the room feeling all, pumped up. It's great to feel good when you do something, right? And that is what music allows you to do very quickly, very quickly. Yeah, you go from not being able to play an instrument, and all of a sudden you can play a melody, right? A song that people sing to. So that sense of achievement has been shown to perhaps raise self-esteem. So I was interested in looking at that. And indeed, we did find that there was a significant increase for the children receiving piano lessons and not for the other one, particularly in school self-esteem. And this is something particularly important in the US, where the transition between middle school at about age 10, 11, is when we see a decrease in self-esteem in our teenagers, particularly in girls, okay? So this was particularly important for us. In terms of motor skills, that is what musicians do. They become the masters of controlling their fingers, their lips, their tongues, their arms as they play their instruments, right? In this case, they were pianists, right? So there were differences in dexterity, in fine motor skills, specifically in response speed. So in summary, there were positive effects on self-esteem, nothing to report in terms of school achievement or in academic achievement, and I would argue that this is not a bad thing. These children were going to school and taking lessons after school. This was added to their skill. They had to go to the lessons, they had to practice every day on top of their school activities. So it didn't negatively affect their school performance. That's good, right? So if anything, it just adds something. But it's not bad, actually, not to find any effect. Yeah? There were no negative effects. There were just no difference, which is a good thing. In terms of cognitive abilities, they were temporary cognitive abilities, particularly in spatial abilities, and there were effects on fine motor skills. Now, this is the slide in which I always like to spend a little bit more time, if time allows, and you are not too tired. And it's the fact that it's not just a matter of offering lessons to our children or our students. It's the fact of whether they are actually learning something in those lessons. So this study lasted 3 years, right? And I found differences between those children who took lessons and didn't take lessons after 1 year and 2 years. No difference after 3 years. But here's the thing. Some children drop out of the lessons along the time. So if I look at their motivation to actually learn piano, how do I know? Well, I can count how many lessons they missed throughout those 3 years of studies, each of those years. I can check the reports from their piano teachers that every week have to account for how long the students have practiced music that week. As reported by the students, there you have it. But, you know, once in a while, a student will say, I practice every day for 1 hour, and the teacher will put consistently a question mark, right? So that is when we will call the parents, and we ask the parents to jump in and monitor practice time. So we collected this weekly for 3 years, okay? So we have a good idea of who was practicing, who was attending the lesson, and on the basis of that, we could determine more or less their motivation to actually learn. And this is the interesting thing. We found that motivation to learn in these students who had never initiated the lessons, we initiated the lessons from them, right? So there were different levels of motivations to start with. They didn't look for the lessons. They didn't come to us. We went to them and said, you want to study piano, right? So there was no difference in how much they improved in cognitive abilities or in self-esteem after 1 year, after 2 years. However, their level of motivation was related to how much they improve in terms of cognitive abilities after 3 years. So the longer the intervention went on, the more important that motivation to learn mattered. So if you really want the benefits of doing something, you have to do it for a long time. You have to stick to it and be at it and try it, right? That is where the practice makes perfect actually makes sense, okay? So it's easy to do it for just a little while. It's hard, to keep doing it every year after year, right? So when I present this to parents, right, or in boards, etc., the parents immediately want to do that wrong thing that I did, that was to enroll children in the lessons, and said, well, it takes a lot more than just paying for the lessons. It takes the supervision of the children, the motivation for the children to continue learning, okay? I said that some of the children drop out during the project, so there were no difference in demographic characteristics between those who drop out and those who continue for 3 years. But there was a difference in motivation and achievement. Teachers knew this 6 weeks after lessons started. They knew who was in trouble, okay? If teachers know, they perhaps can do something if they have the support of their parents. Now, the parents in this group of students, because we chose students from low income, and we had a lot of families, of single-parent families, families in which neither of the parents was actually working. They were on social benefits from the Canadian government. So there was not so much parental support. But if 6 weeks after the start of lessons, the teachers can detect that there is something that they suspect might make the student drop out, an intervention can be done, okay? Now, there were other benefits that were not measured with a standardized test, but I would argue they are very important as well. And it's that many of the siblings of these children who participate in the project started instrumental lessons. The child and the family attended more concerts. The child and the family listened to more classical music as a result of participation in this project. And the children and the parents consider a music career for their children. So we saw a difference, a change in those attitudes between the start of the project and the end of the 3rd year. And I would argue that any of those things is as important as developing cognitive abilities, okay? Now, 6 years later, we went and tried to track these children again. These were now young adults entering university. And what we found was no difference between the control and experimental group, those not taking lessons and taking lessons in terms of memory, cognitive abilities, and self-esteem. And this is a memory, immediate memory. This is delayed memory. This is a cognitive abilities test, an IQ test, the verbal component, and this is the performance component. I don't know how you can get 2 bars that are closer than these 2, actually. But there were other differences. There were differences in music participation throughout those 6 years after we discontinued the project. Students consider music as a career. In fact, one of the students was majoring in music. They value music instruction because they said that they would provide music instruction to their children. And many of them actually continue engaged in music, not necessarily with the piano, but with other instruments. So I think that these things matter. So even if they don't show an improvement in academic achievement, they don't show a worse academic score, they contribute to their lives and their family lives in many other ways, right? So when I present these results and I show what happens after 1 year, after 2 years, and the teachers are all happy, and 2 years, and it's great, and now then they show the 3rd year that there is no difference, and I see them, being sad. I said, actually, these are great results because it really shows that these interventions actually affect the child and the family. And that is why we strive to have music in the schools and music offered to everybody. That is why I'm so glad that you have music everywhere in this country, right? On the streets. I don't know in music. I went just to one school to teach a lesson just yesterday. And I didn't have much chance to visit the music program, but obviously you make music part of your daily life, as it should be, right? So I have a whole other set of findings to discuss, but I see that is 7:20, even though I was given 2 hours. I don't know how you could stay for another hour with me talking and without any more music. So I am going to stop here with just the remark that the only thing I presented here is the effects of music on intellectual development, cognitive abilities, academic achievement. But just to tell you that there is a lot of research that shows the contribution of music to many other aspects. So for example, the lesson that I was teaching at the school just yesterday was an integration of music and literacy. I was working with the book and the children and the rhythms that were represented in these words that were repeated over and over. So through the rhyme that was music, I was actually teaching to associate sound with symbol, that is basis of reading, right? And this can be done, and we do it without even noticing, from the time that our children are babies, and we do rhymes with them, and we insist, and we associate certain movements with certain words, with certain sounds, right? So just in terms of literacy, in terms of health with children, premature infants benefit incredibly from music. The music is such a powerful contingency that, for example, with premature infants that cannot go home until they actually learn to eat, because sometimes they are born so early in their gestational development that they don't have the sucking reflex that is what allows the baby to actually suck milk. If they don't learn to eat, you cannot feed them with a spoon when they are, newborns. So if they don't learn to suck, they cannot go home. They cannot leave the hospital. Well, music actually seems to solve the problem so much faster than any other type of conditional learning treatments. So when babies are trained to even move the lips and they hear a song played, and then they have to not just move the lips, but actually have a sucking type of behavior, as soft and perhaps just only one sucking, they will listen to the music. Then it's increased, the babies actually had to suck with certain level of strength or with certain rhythm in order for the music to keep playing. And this is done in a matter of hours, that infants actually learn that sucking reflex and then can eat, right? Once they actually start getting the milk and the nutrition, then that becomes the contingency, right? It's pleasurable to eat, right? But at the beginning, they don't know that because they have been fed, through tubes all the months that they have been in the NICU, in the intensive care unit, right? So this is just an example of how it's used with children. People with Parkinson's, that is a project that I'm developing at The Ohio State University, in which people with Parkinson's that are losing control of their motor skills little by little, and eventually they die from it, right? When all the basic motor components of the body, like the heart, the lungs, start not being able to continue functioning, right? So as they go through this slow and terrible process of losing these abilities, how music can keep them engaged in doing all these exercises that they need to do, and in thinking about movement. That is what music is great at. When we think about music, our brain is working in very similar ways as when we actually make music or listen to music. Our motor cortex is as active as when we actually play the music. And just thinking about music for these patients makes a difference. Yeah, extends their lives. So in terms of health, it's important for people of all ages. At my age, I'm starting to lose my hearing. It's hard for me to listen to what someone is saying in a very noisy environment. Well, I probably don't have as much trouble as someone who has never taken lessons. As a child, I took lessons, and probably I'm in better shape than those who didn't. This has been found in middle-aged adults and in the elderly, how early childhood music lessons seems to act as a prevention for the hearing loss that we all suffer, okay? There's no way around it. We go through it, right? And, you know, arguably, we have been using music as a treatment forever. We do it every day. We calm infants down with music, or we wake ourselves up, you know, with music when we cannot get out of bed, and we pump music just to get us going, and how to tolerate the insane traffic that we have when we are driving and try to keep calm, right? So we listen to music. So we regulate our mood, our own mood, and the mood of others through music. We have been doing that without knowing that actually there's very clear empirical evidence about this. Okay, so these are just a few examples that I wanted to share with you. There are so many more, but I want to leave time for you to ask me questions and for us to discuss this further. So thank you. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we have some questions, we can field some questions at this time. Just raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. And we will perhaps spend about 10 minutes or so on questions.
A comment that will invite a comment. The voluminous statistical evidence that you brought to bear, my feeling, having started off with that music was in fact so powerful, I thought the statistics basically were a very elaborate way of saying something that I think I could have told you, and just about most of us as a musician, that we're not necessarily smarter than the average people, in fact. Yeah. And some of us don't, and non-musicians probably don't think that we're that smart anyway. But as I said, that was a given for me. But there are very smart ways of using music. I mean, one of the things in our culture, again, is that we value intellection as probably the only gift. And emotional intelligence, which again has to do with what music allows for, the expression of emotions and allowing people to develop their creativity in that regard. Could you comment on some of those aspects? Because you just started to speak to the power of music at the end, and I kind of felt cheated.
I am so sorry that you felt cheated, but I think that you hit the right key in terms of how much we value that score, that grade, right? Whether it's, you know, the top of the grade. So our society, and I think that is true here to tell from the competitions, the music competitions that you have, and the national tests that actually students go through. So that score in achievement, that score in the intelligence test seems to be so important, and actually it's not the only thing, right? So success in life is not always tagged on success in those exams, right? So I'm glad that you're bringing up what I was trying to say, that the power of music is not just in raising a score, in which it has been shown that that's in short terms. So after 1 year, 2 years of lessons, this happens systematically. There's much research that has shown what I show you today. If you give the students 1 year of lessons, there is going to be a change in the way they approach cognitive tasks, okay? Of course there is. When we start doing other things, it affects how we think, okay? That is why in school we have so many different disciplines, and we want students to learn a variety of disciplines, because we think that as they learn to think in different ways, there's transfers, right? In the processes, in the cognitive processes. So there is a lot of research that shows these short-term effects. What I want to avoid is supporting music education programs on the basis of just raising intelligence scores or academic achievement scores. I don't think that that's the reason why we have music in our schools. We have music in our schools because, one, we consider that music is important in society. It's part of our cultural heritage. It's what we do as people, right? We speak, we sing, we walk. These are basic things that we do, and we want to share them together, right? So the importance of music in our culture is a good reason, is reason enough to have music in our curriculum, right? How pleasurable it is. And all these other things that produce in terms of cognitive abilities and mood and distraction and enjoyment and health and perception of well-being, these are added. These are amazing things that actually music brings. So I'm glad that you think that we should not focus so much in just the scores. Unfortunately, in the US, that is what's happening. So you saw that slide with the No Child Left Behind, a law that was introduced by the Bush administration in the 90s that truly affected the ways that schools function in the US. Schools are graded, the school is graded as acceptable or not, superior or not, on the basis of students' scores in these statewide tests. So a score really matters, not just for the student, matters for the teacher who is evaluated on the basis of how students do in the test, and the school. Schools can be closed if for 3 years they don't show a pattern of improvement in these scores, right? So the score matters so much that every effort is put into that. And that is how music programs disappear from the schools, because students need more remedial work in math or more remedial work in language. And what we find is that students miss class more often when they have no music in the schools than when actually they have music. The days they have music, they don't miss school, right? So music brings something else to their lives. And there is evidence to show that. So I'm glad that you think that way. Yes.
Notwithstanding what you just said, I teach part-time at a private studio, and we do have a number of students who come from the upper echelon of society. But we find that they not only achieve academically, but in their music, they do very well as well. A number of them in recent years have gone on to higher learning in universities. And one thing that has stood out in their interviews for that university is not just their SAT scores or their achievement, but their ability in music. That particular institution in the States, and I can name a number of them, have looked on their music achievement and ability as almost in tandem with the academic, in wanting that student at my institution. I don't know if there's something in the music that says I have a rounded student at my institution, somebody who I'm glad to have at my tertiary level institution that's going to make a contribution to society on the whole and to the institution. I don't find that here. I'm a graduate of this institution. I was just a qualified musician before coming here. But nobody when I was coming here asked me, do I do a piano, do I study music, do I sing, do I whatever? And I think this is something probably lacking we could introduce as a part of our choice of a student coming to this institution. I think we need to look at their extracurricular activities more seriously.
And actually, I have something to add to that. That is so true. In the US, people who want to go into medicine or dentistry, for example, or even law, those degrees are second degrees. Students first need to have an undergrad in anything, and then they apply to medicine and dentistry and law, the professions, right? And one of the questions is extracurricular activities, particularly music. And indeed, there is a relationship, as you mentioned, between participation in music and academic achievement when they look at dentistry applications and medicine applications. And that is why, in the past, the path to medicine was to study biology or chemistry, okay? And now music is one of those, right? Because that seems to preparing them well for the selection of medicine. But again, I will emphasize that I cannot claim that the cause of their higher scores is due to their music studies. But music studies is an indication of something. It's class, unfortunately. We are fighting against that, but is an indication of class, and is an indication of discipline, concentration, and higher academic standards. At the individual level and at school level, in high schools, as I show for Texas. Yeah. So all of that seems to fit together in the same ballpark. Yeah.
I'm really sorry to go back to my first question, because I think there's and I've only been in Jamaica for 2 years, so sorry if I come across as not knowing. But, you know, in what you're saying is we're saying that music is so much of Jamaican culture, definitely. Everywhere you go, I mean, I love it. I'm in the supermarket, someone's at the gas station, and, you know, that's different, right? And if I want to make, and please correct me if I'm wrong, so I walk away, this is what I really came here today to understand. Somehow, when I try to advocate for a music education, is one, it's like walking for exercise. I walk every day to the bus, versus training, right? And training to be fit or to sculpt my body or something. This is the difference between being musical, singing in church, right? Enjoying the rhythm. I mean, they got rhythm. You know, I don't got rhythm, but you know, it's just innate, right? That's very different than what you're talking about, which is the formal instruction, the lessons and the discipline, right? Going to dance hall is not the same. Right? Yeah. I'm sorry if I kind of touched if I may ask for that clarification.
Well, you seem that you found the little papers that I had there, because I'm so happy that you have that leading question to what I consider critical here. And is you mentioned the walking, right? It's the exercise that we do, but that doesn't compare to what we do in the gym, except that now, if you go to the US, no one wears watches like me. No, they have a watch that counts steps. And I don't know if here people are as crazy as in the US. They are permanently counting their steps, right? And they compare with each other the steps. So walking, all of a sudden, becomes the thing to do, because we recognize that what we do all the time matters. That little step, you know, to the car that I park further away, or going up one flight of stairs instead of taking the elevator, matters, because it accumulates and matters. So walking is indeed part of that exercise plan. And that is exactly what I wanted to bring here. And is we are having problems in providing access to music education to all students in the US. Even though in such a powerful country in which 90% of the schools seem to have music programs, one thing is access to music education, something else is equal access to equally good music programs, okay? Equally good music teachers, equally good music resources. We are having trouble with that. So what do? We have all these, the power of music, all the benefits of participation in music, yet we are unable to reach all students. Only 20% of them choose to be in music. What do we do about the other 80%? So even in the US, that is a problem. And here's what I truly believe, so thank you for asking. I think that in societies in which music is ingrained in everything we do, we are indeed practicing music. You do not need that music stuff in front of you to think about music, to remember the melody, to compare what you just heard and what you are going to do 5 minutes from now. Is that thinking that is actually learning music? That is what learning music is about. So it would be great if we could all play as beautifully as the students can play here, okay? If we all had the opportunity, but very often we don't. And this is why the focus of my research actually is on musical development, is with young children, and I'm studying families and how families introduce their children to music knowingly, purposefully, or unknowingly. and without realizing what they are doing. And I'm finding great differences in the music environment of infants in Tanzania and in the US. And now we are discussing the possible differences between how infants are raised here in a very rich musical environment in their homes, and perhaps in the US, in which we protect the silence and we engage in the reading the book at the end of the day and the song to clean up the playroom or whatever it is, but doesn't happen all the time. I think that accumulation of walking steps matter, and that accumulation of sounds that are done jointly with meaningful people around you matter. And it will not be done during my lifetime, unfortunately, but I think that is where we are going as in our research. There are studies that are looking at entire towns, the lifestyle of the town, how that affects development. This is truly, groundbreaking research that is being done just to understand that very question. So I don't think that we need to provide music lessons to everybody, because the truth is that not everybody wants to take music lessons. Some children prefer to be, playing soccer rather than taking lessons. They enjoy music and they will learn some, but they don't want to spend 4 hours a day playing a musical instrument, and they shouldn't if they don't like it. They will have very good lives anyways, but music should be part of their lives, and they happen at home. 3 months before they are born, when their auditory system is fully developed, 3 months before they are born. There's a reason why that happens. There's a reason why our first sense, fully developed sense, is the auditory system. We learn about the world through the sounds that we hear, okay? So thank you for asking that question.
We have another question, Marcia.
So the first thing I would really like to do is to congratulate and thank Professor Costa-Giome for the research that you have done, because I think you have really uncovered so much important information about the study of music, that you have found that music does not necessarily, is not the thing that determines development and improvement, because actually those people who sustain their music study, the sustaining of the music study is based on their socioeconomic, parental, and other factors that actually don't contribute to that. Music as a developmental tool in itself. And coming to the point where you're, and this sister over here, actually talking about music as an ingrained experience that all human beings actually have naturally. And unfortunately, I must come back to something that haunts us. It's a duppy that remains in our society. Having been colonized, the colonization of us meant, part of it included, the imposing of the music culture of Europe on us. Which means, for example, all of that music you're hearing in Jamaica, and perhaps even the musicians who were standing here today playing, and I was very interested in the presentation altogether, may not ever have read one note on a staff. You understand? Because the Western staff notation is the filter, the thing that stops people almost in their tracks. And I think it is the thing that actually can make the brain grow big. As you said, bigger is better. Because if you have to decipher and play based on Western notation, your brain is, doing so many activities, high order activities at one time. So now, one thing I wanted to say, well, so many things, but the music culture in Jamaica is almost 99.999% oral. So therefore, Bob Marley never wrote or never read something from staff notation. Mark you, We're talking about popular music, we are talking about abbreviated versions of sound, but nonetheless music, the music that makes us want to move. While the musicians were playing, I noticed that there were people in the room who began to move. And if it had continued for any longer, you might have got some real energy in this room. So that rhythm we're talking about, that vibration that comes from the organic expression and use of sound by a human being is not coming based on staff notation, which is why I asked you about that. And it is coming from the natural mystic, as Bob. Yes. No, I'm not quite finished though. I'm sorry.
Come back and forth. Thank you for providing the opportunity to comment on this. First, one little comment, the joke about bigger is better. If it's true that every thought makes, every thing that we dedicate time to makes our part of our brain grows bigger, we will have heads, you know, like in babies. Right? So my point is that when something gets bigger in there, something else has to get smaller, okay? So that was the joke, actually. Bigger is not necessarily better, it's just a different configuration, okay? But the important thing is the point that you made about the historical past, the differences in races, that I'm glad that you brought it up, because I learned just last week about that landmark study done in Jamaica in the 1930, I think that it was published by Davenport and Thorndike, that was specifically studying the characteristics of different races, and it was done in Jamaica, because they compare whites, blacks, and mulattoes. This was incredible. They were giving these, as you may imagine, the study was so biased, right, to start with. But the interesting thing is that these people were giving all these IQ tests that were being developed at the time, and they were extremely biased towards whites and literacy, the use of symbols, as you mentioned, but they were given also a musical abilities test. It was the seizure test. That was the first standardized test of musical ability. That is appalling, by the way. So seizure was part of this whole group of researchers at the time that was trying to show how intelligence can predict behavior, and the measurement of intelligence was done in ways that we know now were totally inappropriate and had incredibly terrible consequences, right? On euthanization and things that, you know, we should be ashamed as a society for having supported such things. So the interesting thing is that I just found this study, and I finished reading it this morning in terms of the musical abilities test. And surprise, surprise, the Negroes were so much superior in all these tests of musical abilities. So what was the reaction? What was the reaction? Is that those abilities were probably demonstrated low levels, intelligence levels, right? So immediately the interpretation has to be adapted to the things that are showing just what you said, right? In a certain way, because the association between musical abilities and intelligence had been studied since the late 1800s, okay? So the idea of studying something that we consider that is important in some very specific way, like looking at this room, but just looking at that. And by looking at that, I define how this room looks like, while actually the only thing I'm looking at is that point in that wall. So that is what we are doing with this type of tests, right? So the tests are so biased to the use of symbols and notation as you reflected them. And that is why I'm glad that you mentioned that the way we approach cognitive abilities and intellectual development is so narrow-minded. And there is this movement, even in the US, towards the focus on something that might be more relevant, more real, and that is more common across all cultures, right? So I'm sorry that I interrupted there because I just have to mention this.
It wasn't an interruption. It's just that what you said a while ago about musical abilities being particularly attributed on a racial basis, I am not feeling comfortable with that position. I more have the position between what you just said a while ago in terms of looking at a thing, for example, looking at sound and being able to create and express through sound only through literacy, only through being able to read symbols. The moment we leave people outside of the symbols, and as a part of it doesn't necessarily mean that we only have to limit to that one way of doing things, but outside of it, I remember Bob Marley saying, and I'm calling on Bob Marley now. Well, I'm not going to go there, but I'm calling on him because when I saw a documentary and Bob Marley said something about composition, and he said something to the effect, it's not me compose the music, you know. I sit down in a room and I playing with the community around. And when I say, I do this now, somebody say, no man, do that instead, do that instead, do that instead. So by the end of the time, it's a communal effort. And all those things now, this sister who was talking about being here for 2 years and the walking and even what you're saying, and I think what you have done, somebody like myself will be eternally grateful to the process, that 6 years that you're talking about, going to see from the beginning to the end so carefully to find out actually what is this thing about music and its effect, the Mozart effect, all of the things that people have hanged on to. But there's more. And we now are at the point where we need to find that more. But I may say at this time that Jamaica has already found that more. We just haven't put it down on paper yet. We have not put it out yet. But anywhere you go in Jamaica, the musicians in Jamaica are our teachers. And furthermore, we're talking about 2 different paradigms. Jamaican music is orally based. It is orally based. And if we get in a room long enough, we can create a song real fast. We can do it. We can do a whole DJ on what has happened there today. And in fact, everybody will so it's 2 different paradigms. And I'm just thinking always to myself, it's not either or, although for some people it's either or. How wonderful it would be to get a combination. Yes, I think that is going to make the human being more developed on all aspects of themselves. So I'm going to shut up now, but I would like to say to you, I took copious notes that I hope I'm going to, and I hope if it would be possible that I could see the study that you have done, because I think you have gone through so painstakingly to let us see through the steps and to the end where you were saying the motivation aspect of it, that it was not just parents or so who said, but the person who really wants to do music, and not only music, but a particular kind of music. So thank you very much again. Thank you so much.
Okay, I just wanted to, one of the things I want to take from your study as a teacher, and I know there are some teachers in training here that I want you to really walk away with, although you may be very well aware of that, is the whole matter of motivation, how it motivated the students. So it was not necessarily because it's cognitive development that we're trying to improve and so on, but their drive to want to do something. As a young teacher, I learned very, very early in the day that you dare not walk into a classroom, dictate notes, write things on the board, and so on. The minute I started to allow my students to this day to work with the music, use our culture, which largely is music and drama, yeah, because we're very dramatic people. But once you introduced the music and you had the children, so if my objective was that they were going to learn about the people who came to Jamaica. So we had the Europeans, the Arawaks, whatever, all the way down. The minute the children started to put that to song, and we brought in the drums, and my objectives were met, and they were happy about learning. And today, I volunteer to teach in high schools, so I keep in touch with what is happening. And one of the things I noticed, for example, my son's class, they were doing Animal Farm, and it's a satire. But they were not doing it as a satire. They were doing it pretty much as a narrative. And they weren't getting it. So I asked the teacher if I could take the class, and I decided to play Chronic Smile Jamaica. And that in itself, when they listened and they danced and they sang it and everything, and I asked them, what was that about? And they said, oh, about a girl, this beautiful girl and everything. And we went back over it, and they realized that he was actually singing and talking about Jamaica. Immediately they made that connection between that bit of satire and what was happening in Animal Farm. And they thought I was such a great teacher. But the connection was between how we use the music, the lyrics of the music, and so on. I tell any of you going to teach literature, and you're teaching the whole matter of literary devices, metaphors, similes, and all of those things, just draw for the music. Take it out there. All Vibes Cartel. He was excellent at it. Yes, good writers, good music, and the children enjoy it, and they learn through the music. And I always taught in schools where the children were supposed to be low functioning. But at the end of the day, once they were excited and they understand through the music what was happening, they were not low-level learners at all. They achieved. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Joan. I think Prof. Miller had one question, and I think we're going to go to the last question and then let Professor Costa Germani.
Professor Gilman, I couldn't help but do it. But every time I see a group like the students who came in, there were, I think, 11 boys and 3 girls. And if you look across Jamaica, I'm talking about people who are playing instruments, who have spent a lot of time learning to play those instruments. They are boys. And most of them have not learned it through school. So I wonder if you have any data experience to speak about the learning of those skills by the boys who seem to have been neglected by the school system, what it does for them. I don't know. I'm fascinated by what you have said and your research. I just want to know on that issue of gender.
So this is like opening a can of worms, okay? And I'm invested in this because I'm actually developing a couple of projects on the diversification of the music repertoire in American schools. We play the music of old white men. Usually they are dead white men, okay, on top of it. So how to start representing the members of our society a little bit better in terms of the music that we play and that we learn to play. So I'm invested in that. So there are just many things that are related to the point that you made, Professor Miller. There's one that seems incredible, but seems to be very pervasive, and is the association between specific instruments and genders. So a girl on tuba, right? A girl in marimba, not so common. So girls in the US will play flute, string instruments. String instruments are more even out between men and women, but in the low brass, that is the male domain. Jazz is male's domains, okay? So this has been very pervasive, and how to undo it, even in a very formal setting, when you are not dealing with the very important issue that you mentioned, and is that not doing well in school, is very complex. So I'm not sure that these boys are actually not doing so well in school, but I understand your point of being that very often in certain ensembles or in certain type of particularly popular music, we see people who will not engage in formal musical training, reinstating the importance of music that happens outside school. That is exactly my point that I have been trying to make throughout the lecture, that if we are so narrow as actually exclusively focusing on formal music instruction, our Western music instruction, we are losing the battle to start with. So that is exactly what I have been trying to say, that the evidence doesn't stand for it. That has to be a lot more integrated and reach everybody, not just the girls or the boys. So the diversification and access to what really is music education that happens from the time that the baby is born, in the home. That is where music is learned, just like language. Language is learned in the home, no matter whether the mother has a PhD or doesn't even have completed elementary school. That baby will learn to talk, and will learn to talk very well, actually. And that is possible because it happens in the homes, right? And it happens in many ways. And I believe that there is that variability that is ingrained in the way that humans raise our cubs, that there's differences among families, there are differences within families. That variability is actually what makes music more diverse and enjoyable, but also allow us to subsist, right? To allow us to keep working and evolving. Otherwise, we will keep playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the 100th time, right? It's like, is there anything else that we can play, right? So we just keep feeding the same thing. What I think that you are all bringing up is the need to learn music the way we learn music, that is in the homes, by listening, by playing, by creating, by singing it, by making it part of our daily lives. When we go to church, when we are waiting, bored, waiting for the bus to come, we are struggling to keep, from getting angry in the car. All those instances are instances of music making and music learning. And I think that that is the part where research is not having enough evidence, and I think that it matters. So by focusing exclusively on what happens in the band room in these very selective schools, we are not getting the picture that actually happens in daily life all around the world, not just here, but all around the world. So thank you for bringing that up, and I'm sorry that I cannot have the perfect answer for your question, but you are raising a similar point to all the ones that have been raised here, right? That is of participation and the quality of participation and the value of participation. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to just give a round of applause again to Professor Costa Giomi for a really engaging and really interesting presentation. But mine is not the task to say thanks to everyone. It's certainly that of Dr. Carol Hordat Gentles, who is coming now to give the vote of thanks.
Okay, well, I'm sure it has been a very long evening, although a very enjoyable one. So you will forgive me if I just start by saying all protocols observed. It's certainly my pleasure to offer the vote of thanks for this event, the Biennial Errol Lecture 2019. All right? And I'm sure you'll agree that this has been a fabulous evening, a memorable event filled with tributes, accolades, wise words, shared memories, warm greetings. It's also been an evening of deep and absolutely engaging learning. And for this gift of new and deeper knowledge, there are several people we must thank. First of all, to Professor Errol Miller for inspiring this lecture series and for being who you are, and to your wife Sharon for gracing us with your presence here this evening. Also, we'd like to thank Dr. Marcia Rainford, Director of the School of Education, for helping to facilitate this and for performing the role of Mistress of Ceremonies so ably. Thank you to Dr. Joan Spencer Hernandez for moderating the book launch of, I have it here, yeah, right. Long title, The History of the Joint Board of Teacher Education, MONA, The Evolution of Teacher Education in Jamaica and the Western Caribbean, 1956 to 2016. Professor Patrick Bryan, we thank you for helping us to understand what the book is about and for taking on the task of writing it. We really do appreciate that. Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, I think, sorry. I think she has left. Okay, right. But we want to thank her for helping, we appreciate her reflections on the book, and we want to thank her and Professor Bryan for helping us to understand the significance of this publication, which we know will be much appreciated by scholars in the field of teacher education, both in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and I think in the wider, on a global level. And I'm sure it's going to become required reading for many students in the field of teacher education. Congratulations to the students of St. Catherine's High School Band for your musical rendition. We enjoyed it. Dr. O'Neill Mundell, thank you for introducing Professor Eugenia Costa-Giomo. And I think we need to thank you too for suggesting her as a suitable person to deliver the Errol Miller Lecture. I know you will all agree that Professor Costa-Giomo's lecture, Giomi's lecture, was intelligent, informative, fascinating, funny, thought-provoking, and beautifully delivered. Professor, we appreciate your presence here today, and we all leave here today much more informed and excited about the power and benefits of music and learning and health, the intellectual and social benefits of music. And most of all, we leave here remembering that music matters. Yeah? Okay, so, sorry, I have papers all over. And, last but not least, we'd like to thank the organizing committee who worked so long and hard to make this event the success it has been. Dr. Marcia Stewart, Miss Rosemary Campbell, Ms. Romari York, Miss Alison Montgomery, and Dr. O'Neill Mundell. I hope I haven't left anyone out. The committee has asked me that we thank Ms. Florence Francis, who has been the point person here at their regional headquarters and helping them to organize the event. We thank the IT team for their support. We thank the caterers, whose lovely handiwork you will enjoy in the lobby at the entrance of the building. And last but not least, we thank you, the audience, for taking the time to come here this evening, for attending, and for your attentiveness and for your appreciation. So we wish you safe travel home. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.